Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and supporting the Museum of Northern Arizona. My name is Melissa Lawton, and I'm the archivist here at the museum. So you will have seen Alan's talk about some of the art that's in this exhibit. I'm going to focus on a few of the women that we have archival collections for and kind of dig into their experience a little bit more and share with you some of their own words as well. But before I kind of get into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the context in which these women found themselves historically and regionally as well. So there was this long tradition of artists traveling west in the 1800s, coming out, a lot of big male names like Bierstadt and things like that. They were coming out to the west, and they were coming out and they were creating all this amazing art of what this new frontier, because it was still largely unexplored at that point out in the west. And so, so they were coming out and they were making sketches and painting these amazing huge paintings and then taking them back east, taking their work back east and exhibiting it. And so this was kind of an extension of this idea of manifest destiny that we all kind of hear about in history class. This idea that all these Euro-Americans who are settling the United States were meant to travel west and explore and claim it as their own. And so this is kind of an extension of that into the 1900s as well, in the context of art. And so for women, art was one of the few professions that was respected and accepted for them to have a profession of their own outside of the home. And so you see at this time period, when all these women are coming out west, was a time for a lot of women to come out in this area of the country and kind of experience a little more freedom than they had in their regular lives on the East Coast. And so that you see a lot of these women, such as Mary Russell Ferrell Colton, of course, one of our co-founders, Kate Cory coming out in the very early 1900s, Lillian Wilhelm Smith as well, and they all came out specifically because they had a chance to do their art in a space that was exciting and new and make a name for themselves. And so, those are the main three women that I'm going to talk about because those are the women that we have archival collections for here at the museum. And then I'm also going to talk about Nampeyo because I think that her story is important and gives us a counterbalance to this context. Because of course she wasn't this white woman coming from the East Coast and exploring this area. This was her home. And so for her, of course, also being a woman who had already established her art by the time these other women were coming out into the area, and kind of a reaction to that experience as well. And so I kind of wanted to give a little bit of a counterbalance there. So as you know, Mary Russell Ferrell Colton, one of our co-founders, had come out in 1912 for the first time to this region on her honeymoon trip, no less. And on their honeymoon trip, the Coltons summited Humphreys Peak and also explored a lot of areas in California and areas like that as well. And so you have this woman who is trained as a professional artist, but she's also got this adventurous spirit. She wants to go and explore this environment and explore this newfound area. And so that's reflected in her art. And so Lillian Wilhelm Smith was also a trained artist. She was trained in New York. And she first came out west in 1913 with Zane Grey, who was related to her by marriage. So he had married one of her cousins. And she came out with him specifically to illustrate one of his books. And so for her, that was the gateway for her to come into this area and explore it and create this art in an acceptable way. So that was her kind of her job. And so Kate Cory is an interesting example as well, and you've kind of heard some of this. But so she first came out and established a space for herself on the Hopi Mesas in 1905. And this was after she had talked to Louis Aiken, who had just gone back east from coming, they'd come to Arizona. And he said, the Hopi Mesas are a great place to establish an artist colony. And she thought, well, I'm just teaching here in New York. This sounds great. I'm going to go do that. And when she arrived, she was the only one. And so she just lived among the Hopi for 7 years by herself and became friends with them as well. And so you kind of have this, as you can see, you've got all these women who are artists doing what they do best. They come out to this area and explore largely on their own as well. So you've got that kind of freedom happening at the same time. So I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the archives, because I'm the archivist, so of course I'm going to talk about them. So we have collections for Kate Cory, Lillian Wilhelm Smith, and of course Mary Russell Ferrell Colton, one of our co-founders. And these include, correspondence with family and friends, research notes, and in the case of artists, a lot of sketches. Kate Cory, of course, we have many of her photographs, over 700 of them that she took during her 5 years at Hopi. And then we get to Nampeyo, who, of course, did not have her own papers to deposit somewhere. And I feel like that really says a lot, that missing piece that we don't have in the archives. So this idea of whose stories do we save and whose stories do we tell, and how do we do that best with what we have. So for Nampeyo, what we have is a lot of secondhand information, people who interviewed her or her family after her death, and mostly that focuses on how her pottery techniques changed Hopi pottery. And we don't know a lot about her personal life like we do these other women. So I just kind of I like to point that out, that that's kind of a missing story that we don't have. So while I'm very much in favor of saving archives, and I think they're important, they are not the be-all, end-all of the history of this area or even this country. So I just like to point that out a little bit. And so you have this kind of counterbalance of, Nampeyo, who was born in 1859 at the Hano village. And so she is a bit older than the other women in this that I'm talking about, because she had already established herself, and as an artist, she was already 50 years old by the time these women were coming out west. And so she had already established her own, the revival techniques that she had used for her pottery. And then she was also then reacting to all of these Euro-Americans who were coming out west. And so it makes me think about, how much of her techniques and art reflected the demand, and how much were what she really, not really wanted to do, but like what she was inspired to do. So it's an interesting balance to think about in that way. And so the other three women, of course, as you know, they all came to Arizona. Mary Russell co-founded this museum and continued painting for the rest of her life. The other two women, Lillian Wilhelm Smith and Kate Cory, also stayed in Arizona for the rest of their lives. And so for them, when they came out in this area, they basically came out and just stayed. This was their life now. They fell in love with the state and with the area and with what they were able to do in this area. And so for them, it was not a question of, okay, I've come out here and done a summer of fieldwork, or I've done a bunch of sketches and now I'm going to go back east to my regular life. It was, I love this area so much and I can really do what I want to do out here. And so for them, I think, Liberating Landscape as a title, it makes you think about the art in here in many different ways. But for me, as I was going through their collections, kind of looking for maybe some quotes that we haven't heard before from them, it made me think, and I found this connection to the land. So for them, it was something new and exciting, but it's also something that was deeply personal, and they felt very connected to. And so that's kind of basically the context in which these women were finding themselves in this area. And I just wanted to share with you, in their own words, what they were feeling and what they were thinking as they were working and living here. And so I will do that. So the first one I wanted to share with you is from Mary Russell Ferrell Colton, and this is in a letter to her mother in 1916. So this is before her and her husband Harold had fully moved and relocated to the area. After their honeymoon trip, they came out for alternating summers until 1926 when they moved out for permanent relocation. And so the fact that they actually came and visited this area time and time again, I think also speaks to the intense connection that they had with this area. And so Mary Russell writes to her mother in 1916, "This strange silent place was flooded in golden light. Cliffs and buttresses, mesas and canyons were revealed and faded while we watched the changing light upon the desert. The moon came out, the horse bell tinkled faintly, vast space swam below, and we slept. I looked up into the sky, it was dawn, and I reached for the sketch box and began to paint as the veils of rose and gold shifted across the sky." And so you can kind of see, there's this intense connection to the landscape that she's having, and the way they describe it, it's really amazing in that way. And so I also wanted to share with you from Lillian Wilhelm Smith from an undated letter. And she writes, "An opportunity of expressing my love for Arizona came in illustrating Sonnets Up to the Southwest by Lou Ella Archer Elliott, and I shall close with the sonnet My Land, which expresses so much the feeling of all those whose aim it is to tell of the wonder and beauty of Arizona. My land. Oh, land of mine, forgive this humble pen that faithfully has tried, perhaps in vain, to give the world a vision ere it wane, of your pure beauty as I saw it then, to live forever in the souls of men. Your ruins are so proud they would not deign to tell their past, so dim it must remain. Dear land, I pray to see it all again. If there are those who ache to know you well, may these poor verses help them to their goal. And if the day e'er comes when they may see you as you are and fall beneath the spell of tragic beauty, let your wistful soul give unto them what you have given me." And so, that speaks so much to the spiritual connection that she was feeling. She didn't write the poem, but for her, it spoke to her and meant everything. So Kate Cory kept a diary while she lived on the Hopi Mesas, as well as took a lot of photographs. And so we have copies of this diary. And so from 1909, she writes, "The rains of yesterday and day before, especially off on the distant mesas, have brought the water down through the washes in torrents. In places, it spreads itself out on the flat desert, and in the setting sun is shining like mother of pearl in the distance between young rows of corn, where it will settle down into the earth and ensure the crops for this year. But vast floods of it are roaring by through its channel, carved through sand in a day. Should more come, and yet more, till the ground is more than saturated, it will tear the corn away by the roots in its fury. While I watch and listen to the flood, the distant mesa across the desert has dyed a deep, rich blood color, and a long, slender span of rainbow has blended into the evening clouds, and the sky west grown radiant in gold." And so all those different colors and textures that she's evoking, you can tell how much that inspires the art that she's creating at this time, because she's also painting as well as taking photographs of her time on the Hopi Mesas. And so I just love how much that comes through in her writing, in her diary for nobody, really, but herself. And so then, of course, we come back to Nampeyo again, who, of course, I can't really quote because I don't have any actual materials that she left behind in the same way. And so I just kind of wanted to end with that to kind of really drive that point home of, we don't have the same voice, the same amount of, information about her personal life. And I find that personally quite disappointing because I would love to know what she actually thought. Not just about her art, but about her life. And so I have left some time for questions. I don't know if we have any.
We actually, a couple online. Somebody came in, first off, they love your dress.
Oh, thank you.
That came in right at the beginning.
It's the most popular thing I've done today.
And so one of the questions we got is, did any of these women know each other?
Yes, actually. So Kate Cory, living and working on the Hopi Mesas at the same time that Nampeyo was alive and working, they definitely met. Kate Cory wrote about Nampeyo a couple of times, very briefly in her diary, mostly in terms of, Nampeyo's house fell apart, so she came down to live at this village instead and things like that. So it's not so much you might think of with these women knowing each other and like collaborating in a way, but contemporaneously they definitely knew each other. And I believe that Lillian Wilhelm Smith corresponded with museum staff as well. And so there's correspondence that kind of shows, Mary Russell and Lillian Wilhelm Smith kind of communicating as artists, but also as lovers of Northern Arizona and the land that they lived in. So that's a good question.
Is there a reason why we chose 4 women artists and not more?
Well, there are 6 women artists
6 women,
in the exhibit. I only talked about 4 because those are the ones I could, dig through their fingers. I don't know. I was not involved in the development of the exhibit. I have a feeling it's a lot to do with what we had in our collection and how we could tell stories, and also probably space in the gallery. So, but 6 is a nice round number. It's half a dozen. Not bad.
And I know some of those have done a fine art auction. They've seen a lot of these before we actually had them out in this exhibit. Are there other pieces that we have in collections that we could easily put in this exhibit?
Absolutely. And that is, well, Kate Cory is a good example of that. There are 6 photographs. We have over 750 that we could have chosen from. We have other pieces by Lillian Wilhelm Smith. Of course, we have a lot of more pieces by Mary Russell because I think we have most of her works in our collection. And so when we were selecting for this exhibit, it was mostly, what hasn't been seen before, what hasn't been on exhibit in a while, and how can we tell a story? And so, yeah, that's always a part of any exhibits with collections is we have a lot to work with. How do we narrow it down and present what we want to? So, but it's also a good reason to come back to the museum time and time again because we're always changing things up.
And I know because of COVID, we had to shut down the library and we had to shut down access to a lot of the great things we have in collections and in archives. If people want to know more and they just want to see more, want to know more, how can they do that?
Sure. There's a lot of information about our collections on our website. And all of us collections department staff are still in the office. We're doing a lot of behind the scenes work that we don't have time to do a lot of the time that we're at work, but we are still available. So if people have questions about what we have, or they're looking for something in particular, they can always shoot us an email. Email is probably better. We're working from home, a lot of us still. So, but we're happy to kind of dig in and let people know what we have.
Awesome. We got a couple more popping in, actually. We only got a couple more minutes, but these are from Karen online. Was the art of these artists appreciated outside of Arizona and the West during their lives? And her second question is, was the art of these artists, well, same question, just hit me twice. Was the art of these artists appreciated outside of Arizona and the West during their lives?
Yes, absolutely. In the case of Mary Russell, she was part of the Philadelphia 10, these 10 women artists who were from Philadelphia. And she exhibited her paintings with them and on her own across the country throughout the rest of her life. Kate Cory as well had exhibits, that whole, back east thing I talked about. Even though they physically still lived here, they were still exhibiting their art elsewhere. And Lillian Wilhelm Smith as well. Nampeyo was incredibly popular as a potter. She was basically, I don't know how people feel about it today, but at the time she was basically the greatest Hopi potter ever. And she went to Chicago actually for an exhibit of her pottery during her lifetime. And there were collectors who were collecting specifically her pottery during her lifetime. And so I think that was part of the reason why her daughters and granddaughters continued her tradition. But even after she went blind and couldn't paint anymore, she was still creating. So very popular during their lives, absolutely. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining me.